and I am excited to hear from today's speaker. But before I announce, let's go ahead and pray. Lord Jesus, thank you for everything that you do for us. I ask that you give our speaker the words to say, help her to do well. I also ask that you help everyone here to be receptive of the information, the knowledge, and the experience that you want to share through our talk today. Please give us your presence and help us to enjoy ourselves. In your name, amen. All right, I'd like to introduce to you Anna. Give her a hand.
Hello guys. I'm going to start off with saying I'm very nervous and I get really shaky and out of breath when I talk. So be patient with me, please, if I have to take a moment to collect myself. To start off, it's kind of an activity. You can get into groups or just talk to the people around you. But I want you to think about a time that you needed to have faith or trust in someone or something around you, even when it didn't seem like a very good situation. So just mingle among yourselves for a little bit while I stand here. Yeah, a time you had to have faith. Talk about a time you had to have faith in someone or something, even if the situation didn't seem very good.
I'm like facing this like had to have faith in God or had to have faith in something?
It could be God or people or a rope holding you on something.
I had to have faith because for robotics.
Yeah.
I had to have faith that St. John, that new building was that it wouldn't, so that it wouldn't kill itself.
That battery on the phone.
Are we gonna charge them before the competition this time?
We learned from our new ones. Our vehicles on gas.
I don't know when to cut people off.
And they were on the empty side, but we made it to gas. For like 30 minutes, and on the empty one.
I'm going to give you guys like 30 seconds to finish, and then I'm taking over again.
I don't know, I have to have faith in everything all the time. Like I have faith this couch won't like kill me when I sit down. Or me.
But what if it does?
Yeah, I have to have faith that people will sit down.
First 4 leaves.
He has faith in his frown.
Okay. Are we good now?
Yeah.
We're in the mindset?
Yeah.
All right. Again, another warning. This is a creative story. I'm not going to say everything about it is 100% accurate to the Bible. I mean, it's still based in the Bible, but there might be some history or facts that are not fully exact. It doesn't help the sources are scattered and hard to find, but please don't get mad at me. To start with our memory... What? Okay. Our memory verse that I picked is Hebrews 12:2. We do this by keeping our eyes on Jesus, the champion who initiates and perfects our faith. Because of the joy awaiting him, he endured the cross, disregarding its shame. Now he is seated in the place of honor beside God's throne. The sun had already been down for hours, yet I still stood there. Dirt beneath my feet. Oh, I didn't introduce my character. My character's Mary.
Which Mary?
Mother of Jesus. Wow. I started real great. I'm talking about Mary and her perspective on the resurrection of her son. Now we restart. Okay. The sun had already been down for hours, yet I still stood there. Dirt beneath my feet and a brisk evening wind blowing around me. My eyes were burning from the tears that had already dried up at this point, but I continued to look on, staring at the cold, lifeless boulder in front of me, hoping it would disappear and that warm, smiling face would replace it. But it remained, taunting me like the soldiers in crowds had soon before. Suddenly, my quiet trance was broken when I felt a delicate tap on my shoulder. Mary, we must go now. Mary Magdalene beckoned quietly. I suppose you are right, I whispered. We slowly walked away from the tomb and then parted ways to go home. I entered through my door and gazed at the room, full of various wooden furniture that Joseph and Jesus had created together years back. I walked towards the table and placed my hand on it, feeling the grain of the wood. The same type that was used on that cursed cross that now was stained with the blood of my son. I pulled away and fell down on my mat, curling up and squeezing my eyes shut. I believe that for the first time in this universe, God and I are now truly equal. Our son, our only dearly beloved son, was gone. A pain many humans will go through, but God and I now shared in that sorrow in a way no others could fathom. God, this can't be it. You didn't send him to save us without saving himself too. Please be selfish just this once and let him come back to us. No tears were left to fall from my eyes, but the burden was heavy, enough as it weighed on me. There had to be more. The miracles, the healing, the stories, they weren't for nothing. What is the point of creating a kingdom for your people if the king isn't there to rule it? I refuse to believe that the tomb will remain lifeless. There has to be more to the story. God kept his word when I was bringing this boy into the world. I watched Jesus perform acts that shouldn't be possible. I saw lives change and faces light up when he spoke. The storm ceased, the dead rose, and the ground trembled. He held dominion over the forces of the universe. He must still have that dominion now. I continued to sit there with my thoughts, wrestling with the doubt. I knew he was dead. I saw him hanging there. I watched them lay him in the tomb and roll a stone in front of it. Yet something inside me could not accept the fact he was really dead. God always had a plan up until this point. Could this one really end with his son being gone forever? Is there joy in being saved if you can't celebrate with the one who saved you? As these thoughts ran through my head, I felt exhaustion take over and I slowly fell asleep. The next morning I woke to the sun shining in as its rays cast themselves across the once dark room. The glow reflecting onto the table, bringing it a softer, more optimistic light than the cool moon had the night before. With this welcoming light came a strange feeling of hope I didn't expect to feel so soon. I began to think about all the times that Jesus has proved himself to be greater than what I could have ever thought him to be. His first miracle at the wedding. What a simple thing to begin with, yet so incredible to behold. I thought of all the healings, not just the physical, but the spiritual and emotional. All the stories and his incredible sermons. I smiled. How could such a simple woman have brought this beautiful thing into the world? He arrived in such a grand entrance as a small, helpless creature and went out in the cruel and heartless way as one of the kindest and greatest men to ever exist. But something felt out of place. Something was pulling at my heart in a way that didn't hurt but brought a strange feeling of comfort. Was he really dead, sleeping? Has he returned to his Father and is watching down on us once again? Or will he return with us and truly save us from the world? All I knew is God was one of our surprises, but he always had a plan, and something told me that this wasn't the end of that plan. As the day came to a close and the Sabbath ended, Mary Magdalene appeared at my door. "Mary, come in. What brings you here this evening?" I said as we sat down. "A few of us women realized they never prepared Jesus for burial, so we're planning on preparing some spices and anointing the body. We're wondering if you would like to join us. You do not have to if you don't wish." She spoke very quietly. "Of course I'll come. When are we going?" "Early tomorrow morning, most likely." "All right, I should prepare some ointments myself then," I said as I stood up and gathered supplies. Mary also got up and began to help me. As we went about our task, we began to talk. "Mary, has Jesus or the other disciples ever mentioned anything about his death or what would come after?" I asked in a small voice. Realizing that in the years that Jesus left to go on his own, I hadn't really seen everything he had done. I wasn't there for all of his talks and his lessons. I didn't know him the way the followers did. She looked up at me quickly, then slowly put her head back down. "Yes, Jesus had mentioned it before, although I get most of what he said about it from the others." I looked at her intently, waiting for more. If I was going to get any proof to back up my feelings, it would be from the followers. Mary held information that I needed to remove doubts from my mind. The other disciples were hiding together from the people who killed Jesus. I can't blame them. The man they followed and trusted was dead, and they were a part of his so-called crimes. I suppose I don't feel the same fear as them. Trying to correctly raise the Messiah of the world removes a lot of other fear from you. Mary eventually continued. "He always mentioned how he'll be killed. The disciples always got upset by this, though. They never wanted to hear that from him. They didn't want to think of him suffering, especially from the hands of those around him. I suppose I understand that. Most people shouldn't know when they're going to die if things aren't going wrong for them at the moment," I said, staring forward. He knew he was going to die. How hard it must have been to know that and go through with it with as much peace as he did. "There is more, though," Mary said, her eyes focused down in front of her. "More? Go on." I vaguely remember Jesus telling us, but I know the disciples shared it with me as well. They talked about this part quite a bit. Something flashed in her eyes, something brighter than the rays of sun had shone earlier. He said he returned from the dead. He would be raised 3 days after. She looked over at me, her eyes catching mine. I felt a tear fall from my face. Everything began to flash through my mind. Every moment that Jesus had been correct, all the prophecies, all the events that had happened. But the disciples never understood what he meant. It wasn't something we understood as possible, and it didn't make any sense. They always discussed what it could mean, but I'm not sure if anyone actually asked. She went on almost frantically, like she was trying to find meaning behind the words and explain herself after she saw my reaction. Mary, I began quietly, he must be coming back. Somehow, someway, he meant what he said. There is no hidden meaning. He will be rising from the dead, just as he said. I smiled, holding back more tears. But how? She began to choke up. How is that possible? He died. We watched it happen. Yes, but God always finds a way. How can we expect anything less than this when we've already seen what he's capable of? I put my hand on her shoulder, trying to reassure her. I understand the doubt she had. We know what we saw that day on the hill, but I know what God has done. I've seen the miracles he has shown. I've carried one in my own body, and I raised it all these years. If Jesus said he's coming back, he means it. When has he lied to us before? I said, straightening my posture. The answer had been found. My son was coming back. Everything up until now was proving it. We just had to wait for that moment of truth. Mary's eyes began to fill with tears. A small smile began to form on her face, and she started to hold back laughter. We've been fools these past few days, she choked back between a sob and a smile. I laughed and pulled her into an embrace. Not fools, my dear, our minds were simply clouded with the fear of the unknown. We stood there in our moment of fellowship, realizing all the decisions Jesus had made that proved he knew what he was doing. He went along with that mob so willingly. There was turmoil for sure, but he trusted his Father's will. He looked beyond the grave at all the people he loved and wished to save from the same fate he was going to bear. Eventually, Mary Magdalene left for the night, and I went to bed, falling asleep in a much better state of mind than I had the evening before. I woke up early in the morning and gathered the supplies we had prepared. Going outside, I met with Mary and the other women who were coming with us, and we began our walk towards the tomb. Despite the optimism I felt during our talk last night, there was still a nervous pit in my stomach. Seeing that tomb, cold and dark, wasn't something I was fully prepared to look at again. That grand boulder that would sit high above me and mock me below. That's right, the boulder. How will we move the boulder that stands there? I said awkwardly, disrupting the chatter around me. I suppose you are correct, Mary stopped and looked around. Surely we can't move it ourselves. She let out a nervous laugh. Just then one of the other women spoke up. I believe they may have stationed guards near the tomb, something about them being afraid of the body being stolen. Maybe we can convince them to move it if they know what we're going to do. While it was a risky task, none of us could think of anything better, so we continued on our way. That pit still churned inside of me. Guards? Stealing? What on earth do they think people are planning? Are they aware of what Jesus has told his disciples? Do they plan on keeping him in the tomb if he is to come out? It felt like nonsense in my head, but I tried to keep up with the group. We neared the tomb, my body now feeling sick of the idea of going in. 3 days echoed in my head. 3 days. Today marked that. But what was going to be there when we rolled the stone back? I know he said he was coming back, and I believed it. Yet last time I looked at the boulder, it showed me everything physical that proved he was dead. Behind it, my son laying there as his body fell into a dormant state, the color draining from his face. Was I really ready to see that? Ready to see him in such a weak state once again? Suddenly we stopped. The air was cold and dreary just days before, but now it gave a different feel, one that was calm and inviting. There was a bright light ahead of us, one that could rival the mighty sun. 2 men stood there clothed in beautiful robes that flowed around them like the clouds in the sky. We all froze, afraid, yet a feeling of joy was dancing around us. Do not be afraid, they spoke, their voices rolling through our ears like the low rumble of thunder. He's not found in the tomb. He's risen from the dead. I dropped my basket in my hand and my eyes began to blur. It was true. Jesus was alive. He's returned just like he said. 3 days echoed through my mind once more. Soon the men disappeared and we went to the tomb. Just like they said, it was empty, nothing but the burial cloth left behind. We walked back out and stood there silent, not knowing what to say about what we've seen. All we knew was the grave was empty and the body was nowhere to be found. Tears filled my eyes. I needed to see him. I needed to know my son was truly alive. The women began to murmur, deciding if they should share the news with people or wait and see what happens. Then it went silent once more. Suddenly, Mary Magdalene let out a short, sharp gasp, and began to run. She fell down in front of someone, grabbing their feet and letting her head fall to the ground. I followed her movements and then had the courage to look up. And before me, shining like the stars in the sky. Not the cold, mocking boulder, but instead the warm, smiling face of my beloved son. Without letting another second pass, I ran, crumbling to his feet like Mary had before, my tears falling and mixing with the dew that was still on the morning grass. My son was alive. He was here in front of me. I felt his skin, I saw his scars, and I heard his still, gentle voice reassuring me. I have risen, he spoke quietly, kneeling down to embrace me. It was once my job to protect him, my job to assure him everything would be okay and wipe his tears. Now he lifts my face and dries my eyes, comforting the crumbling human that was his mother. My son, my boy, was alive, and for the second time, God and I shared in the same feeling, the feeling of overwhelming and unmeasurable joy that our child lives. Heaven had not only won the battle, but the victory could finally be declared. The final blow had been dealt. The grave no longer had a grip on the faultless lamb. Its thorns no longer pierced his precious skin, and the insults no longer damaged his pure and perfect mind. Humanity's sins had doomed themselves to the dirt, but God's love has saved us. The price of our mistakes needed to be collected, but Jesus paid that price, and now the debt was death's to pay. Once again, God has fulfilled his promises. The words that Jesus spoke came true just like they always have. Despite the doubts I may have had, my devotion can now reap the benefits of holding on. Kneeling there holding my once dead child in my arms, all the questions made sense. All the fear I felt when I found out I was to carry this boy, all the ridicule, the uncertainty, it was all worth it in that moment. My sins had been washed away and the world had been given its second chance. No more doubts were left in my mind, for God has proven once more that he had a plan for my life. And I was finally able to see the strength that my faith truly held. Mary, mother of Jesus, was no doubt a woman of great faith. God went silent from his people for 400 years, and when the time came, he chose a young woman to carry out one of the most difficult tasks possible. Being young, soon to be married, was already tough. Becoming a mother so soon would have been even harder. Becoming the mother of the soon-to-be Savior of the world and the Son of God, practically impossible. But she did it. She listened to God and she followed in his command and carried out the impossible task. There was doubt, and I can't say there wasn't. You can't imagine a loving mother watching her son get killed and being told he'll come back without expecting her to feel some fear along the way. But her doubts didn't mean she didn't have faith. I believe that sitting with your doubts and not doing anything is what makes them a problem. That's when people can complain there are no answers. Mary didn't do that. She wrestled with God and her thoughts, and she tried to understand what she was feeling. She didn't let go of her beliefs, but tried to solidify them with people she knew she could trust and experiences she could go back on. She didn't let go because she didn't want to. I can relate to her in this way. Especially last year, I doubted my faith. Things didn't make sense, and God went silent around me. I didn't have anyone to talk to that I felt comfortable sharing with. But something inside of me didn't want to let go of what I believed in. The world without faith seemed too dark to be in, and I didn't want that. So I looked for answers, and I began to talk to people. I finally accepted that I was confused, and I was able to fight my way back into a more stable relationship with God. Doubt can be healthy. It's human. And many of the Bible's greatest heroes dealt with it. But what made them great was the fact they didn't give up. They didn't abandon God when it seemed like he had abandoned them. They looked for answers, and they found them just like Mary did. Through her will, her experiences, friends, she was able to have faith that Jesus would come back again. I encourage you to go out there and look for those answers, so you can have faith like Mary that Jesus will come back for us again as well. Thank you.